Welcome to Ask the Latina. I'm your host, Terry Beltran. This program is about the opportunity to ask and learn from a Latina trailblazer, with the mission to inspire and motivate Latinas to enter a career where we just do not have enough representation. For more resources, visit our website, askthelatina.com. Welcome to Ask the Latina. Today, I am very thrilled to have my guest who happens to have a background in both technology and business. Her name is Paola Rios Schaaf, and she is the product leader for a company called Ellvevation Education. Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for being with us, Paola, and tell us a little about, first of all, about yourself. But we're excited to hear so much about your journey and especially where you are today.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share my story because I think every story is interesting and different. And the more stories we hear, the more kind of community we feel. And at the same time, the more that we can learn. So my story is not unlike many other stories. I'm originally from Lima. My dad is from Peru, grown and raised. My mom is from Bolivia. She's from Santa Cruz. And my dad and mom met sharing letters, which is interesting. And my mom decided to uphold her life and move to Lima. And I grew up there for 6 years and then went on a quest with my dad and his work all over Latin America. I lived in Venezuela, where I did high school, in Guatemala, where I did elementary school. And my dad also traveled to Colombia and the Dominican Republic, where I was fortunate enough to spend some time. I came to college here in the US as the first woman in my family to leave her home at age 18, which was a big deal, especially to my dad. I come from a very conservative Catholic family, and he had a very hard time letting me come to school. My mom, on the other hand, who had upheld her life and left to marry my dad, was like, "Go," and I give her a lot of credit for really pushing my dad to allowing for that. Now, within 18 months of that, my brother was here in school, living with me, and then my sister. So we're very fortunate that not only did I get to spend this kind of special youth friendship time with my siblings here in Boston, um, but we got to experience college together as well. So I graduated with a degree in economics and international business, concentration in French as well. And I thought that's what my life was going to be. And after a little bit of time, I ended up in technology, which is where I am today.
That's great. It's funny because we have the same kind of background as far as parents go. And it's interesting, but you followed, even though I was born here, you following kind of similar steps as my mom, because she was the oldest and she came here, and soon enough her sister was here and her brother was here. So it's really nice. I think they probably look up to you, and they probably as the person who led them to another opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I say my brother is now in Dallas, Texas. He runs his own business. He's married, has a child, which is fantastic. My sister actually went back home to Lima. And now that my parents are retired, she lives with them. But I think we all are very now conscious after so many years from that happening. What a great opportunity, right? I hate to admit it, but when I first heard my brother was coming, I was like, oh no, my freedom is going to be ruined. And now looking back, I feel so fortunate because I think like there was a bond there that is not only from childhood, it's from being a young adult and experiencing new things, a new country, a new culture, that we had each other for that, which is not the case for everybody. And I'm very grateful that I got that opportunity.
Yeah. And it's amazing because you've gone through, I mean, most people kind of go through different schools within the United States, but you went through different schools without, throughout the Latin America continent. So what was that like? And were there times where, I mean, at what point did you kind of decide you were going to go to college, and where were you going to go?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good question, especially because my mom started college but didn't finish. She decided to get married, which is generally part of her generation.
Mm.
But I think in some ways that flipped the script for her with her children. She really expected that, and she was the one to give us the most structure at home. My dad has always been ambitious and proactive. I think that in part he grabbed his family and said, "We're leaving." When I was 6, my youngest sister was 2, and we moved to Guatemala with this thought of like, it is okay to give up your home to seek for a better life for your family. That was like a huge part of my upbringing, that my dad had given up living close to his mother, close to his sister, close to our cousins, so that we could go and have a better life, right? So even though it was a little bit weird to leave my friends at school in Peru, landing in Guatemala and having to go to a new school, I was very aware that this was not common, that it was a choice made. And, at first you don't think much of it, but slowly you start internalizing how your accent being different makes you a little different and therefore weird to the other kids. You start realizing how the way that you dress
Mm.
is different and makes you fit in or not.
Mm.
So those were the memories from Lima. I don't have that clear. I have pictures and I kind of remember I was 6. I know a lot of people have really crisp memories of when they were really young. I don't, but I do have a very clear memory. And if I have to think back of my earliest memory, is probably arriving at the airport in Guatemala and realizing no one was waiting for us there.
Mm.
Like it was just the 5 of us. So that created a really nice family bond where, my parents, mom and dad were basically the only authority. So with my dad being successful because he had gone to college, which was the kind of the dynamic at the time, and my mom in some ways being a lot harder on herself for having not finished
Mm.
school as I grew up, this idea of going to college was really sharp and crisp. Now, I was in Venezuela. By the time I was in Venezuela, I had the opportunity because of my dad's work. Um, he got reimbursed for education. So we went to this fancy, beautiful school, international
Mhm.
school, set basically an American system school. And the reason why we did that is because my dad expected to move more.
Mhm.
And people at his work told him, if you keep your kids in the national education system and you keep moving, they're going to lose time. They're going to lose
Mm.
years. So we went to this beautiful school, but most of the people were diplomats, were people in the military.
Mm.
So it was like super diverse, the high school that I went to, very small. I was in a graduating class of 21 people.
Wow.
But it was also like a shift, right? In I had studied English and my schools usually had that element and were bilingual, but going into curriculum, especially for math and sciences in English, was very challenging.
Mm.
And I remember getting to 10th grade, being part of the National Honor Society, being encouraged to do well, and then being called out, hey, do you want to do AP classes? Do you want to
Mhm.
do international baccalaureate classes? And I didn't even know what those meant. My parents definitely didn't know what that meant. And that's where I saw a really big shift in like the how the aspiration begins at the point of high school,
Yeah.
and like how you have to start shaping yourself at the point when you're in high school versus what I thought it was, which was like, I'm going to graduate high school, go to whatever college, and then my life is going to start when I start working. I started realizing, oh, every decision that you make, since the pre SAT in 8th grade and then the post SAT and like all this preparation are hinting to this is what's going to kind of shape your future and the next step. So I always focus on that next step and trying to do my best in trying to figure it out because, like I said, I was the first generation where I had those opportunities. My dad studied in Peru in a public university, loves to tell the story of how the public university, was super hard. There
Mm.
was one teacher or one professor for like 100
Mm.
students, how they would go on
Yeah.
queue, like, like there would be like some sort of disruption and he would have to wait for school to come back. He had to work and study. He actually picked his degree based on the fact that the accounting degree was the only one that allowed you to work
Mm.
and he couldn't afford school. if he didn't work at the same time. So he didn't even get a choice in what he chose to study. So all these kind of stories that come from, how my mom, how my dad made their decisions always led me to believe like if the opportunity is present, take it, do the best at choosing. But I did not have helicopter parents that helped me apply to college or like knew where to apply
Mm.
or guided me into how to do it. It was actually, I give credit to the advisor in my high school that said, you have the grades, you can get a scholarship. And I was like, what, really? And I'm very proud of saying that at the end of the day, my college education at Brandeis here was cheaper than my high school education
Now, was your high school in Venezuela or here
in
in Venezuela?
Venezuela.
And that's where you had the advisor that talked to you about the scholarship. And you were probably
Yes,
there before Maduro and before all this whole thing that changed and turned
I was.
Venezuela the sad upside down like the way it is today. You're very fortunate.
I'm very fortunate that I'm that old. Um, and I feel very connected to the kind of history and politics of Venezuela, because I had an aspiration of studying politics when I actually came to college.
Mm.
And I'm very lucky in having friends that are still in Venezuela and seeing a system that starts mistrusting the people in power, the people that take
Yeah.
office, shapes the way that our societies move. And in my experience, it's like a domino effect that happens country to country,
Mm.
right? And we've seen it a little bit here, but certainly in Latin America and in South America
Yeah.
in the
And
last
And I
decade.
think the thing there, though, that you had this education there was it goes to show how Venezuela was one of the best countries with so much advanced. There was so many big companies that were there. General Motors used to be there. A lot of companies used to be there. It was a very, very well structured country, and now it's
Yeah,
falling
one
apart.
one of the things that I like to point out was that in in the advising piece from high school, I was told, "Hey, there's many great universities here if you wanted to stay." And I just didn't have an anchor there. My parents, I knew they were moving to Colombia and they were making their trip to go to Bogota, which is where my brother and sister graduated high school. So I knew that I like staying there was like staying by myself.
Mm.
And because of the environment I was in, a lot of my friends were coming to school in the US. So it just felt like, well, that's more central. My parents are going to move around. I can be with some friends that I know from high school, very kind of young thought process in
Mm.
my mind. But yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, that's really good. So then you bonded with other students that came here as well from Venezuela then.
Yes, not only that, but I do think that there is something that the opportunity to move did. I was very stubborn and somewhat upset every time we had to move.
Mm.
So, like, maybe not the first time, but I remember leaving Guatemala feeling like, you're destroying my life, because I was like at the cusp of being a teenager. And then in
Mhm.
Venezuela, I also felt like, oh my God, like it would be so much easier if we just stayed here and I could stay in school here. Like, you're ruining everything. Because I had friends that were going to stay. But once I came to college and you start seeking the connection of other immigrants, you start seeking the shared experience of somebody leaving home as an international student coming here and try to figure out how to make it work, having your friends, your family away. And I was very lucky. My best friend from high school came to school in New York.
Mm.
So it was not only the Boston community that I could have at Brandeis, and also in Boston, I had friends at Northeastern. That's where my brother ended up going. I had friends at Suffolk University. I had friends in Emerson. So it was like a little bit of a community that I created of people like me that had like graduated in Latin America and come here. But having my best friend also meant that like, I was able to like get on a bus. There was like this very cheap, we call them the Chinatown bus, because it is in the Chinatown of both cities that you would, get the bus. And it was like a $15 bus at the time,
Wow.
the most expensive bus to get in 6 hours back and forth from New York. And it took 6 hours because they were really slow and very packed, and usually traveled during the traffic hours. So Friday night, and you will return Sunday night. Um, and spend the weekend in New York, which is so fun when I think about it, and gutsy in my part because I
New York
New
is
York
so
is a
much
big
fun. I
city.
agree with you on that. I love New York. But yeah, it is expensive. It's probably more economic to drive like you did, take the bus in, even though it sounded expensive. But yeah, it's very expensive to live in New York. And I imagine, I'm not sure about studying in New York if you were, to stay at a dorm or what the cost would be.
Yeah, my friend Laura, who's now a speech therapist, she was doing her bachelor there in New York. Again, scholarships, and all that I remember about going to visit her was that she was always working. She worked at restaurants, she worked at bars when she got a little bit older. Um, and I admire her a ton because she worked throughout her um, degree so that she could afford living there. She was living in Harlem, and I remember my mom was always very worried that I was going there in the
Mhm.
weekends because she didn't know what New York was
Yeah.
like. But you make it work, right? There's another thing that when you're young, you are also flexible and get creative about finding the best discounts where you can have like the happy hour meals.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the experience. The adventure was, like we didn't even get in the subway. We just walked like 36 blocks, to get from the cheapest place to have
Yep.
breakfast to, the cheapest secondhand shopping store, where we could get like awesome clothes for college that were secondhand, and then like go back and, like try to find another cheap place to eat, or a discount grocery store to get better. Like that experience is very forming because like you also get a sense of I was able to come to school, but my dad didn't send me a lot of money. And I went to a school, this is a Jewish school preliminarily. It was the first time that I felt I was a minority in my education.
Hmm.
And, a lot of the students that go there come from very well to do families.
Mm.
So sometimes their weekend activities and their clubs, would be like, let's go golf. And it's like, that's an expensive hobby to
It is
have,
very
right? Or
expensive. Mhm.
yeah, or like let's take a trip to go skiing. Like that, first of all, that I don't ski because I didn't grow up in places where you could ski. But second of all, it's like a 1 day activity that could be my entire monthly budget,
Yeah,
right?
because skiing is
So
expensive too.
yes, exactly. So you kind of you have to find your community and like-minded people, right? That work with the budget they have, but it makes you resourceful,
Yeah.
which is the other thing, right? And now that I'm an adult, that I don't need to necessarily always look at prices, I still do. And I still want to get a good deal, and I still seek for kind of the adventure of like seeing where I can get the biggest discount and how can I travel in a way that is frugal.
Right,
So
right.
that has stayed with me for sure.
So
And my mom is a
so
little
you
bit
did
like that.
scholarships. How did you go about, what was that experience like? Because I know that, I mean, for myself, I wish I had thought about scholarships. I did. I paid my way through college. And now, I learn about this, and obviously I'm coaching my own son through it because it's so important. He's going to a very expensive private engineering school or university. But how did you go about doing that, given the fact that you were in high school, you were coming from Venezuela? What was that like, as far as applying and knowing where to go? I know you're guided, but take us through what that was like.
Yeah. I wish I had more strategic thinking at that time, because one of the things that was difficult was our school provided us a lot of resources. And because it was so small, they were somewhat personalized resources, which was great. But one of the things that they did was like they would give us kind of like a set of potential scholarships that you could apply for.
Mm,
And then you had to look at the requirements and you had to see, okay, not only can I do this, but like is my timing right and are my credits right to map to what the scholarship is looking for. So I applied to probably 13 schools. And why I say is like I wish I was more strategic is because it was a lot of paperwork at the time, also a lot less
mhm.
computer related
Yeah.
stuff. And I think I would have done better by narrowing down that list as opposed to going through all 13 of them. But one of the strategies that helped me, and I always advise younger students to do, is there's a lot of information out there. But first, do the self serving analysis of like, what do you want to do so that you can narrow down the type of school that you want to go to? The other thing, which I believe is still predominant in our society. And personally, I do not believe in, because I feel like I feel wealthy and successful in my life without having had that. The advisors told me, you could apply to Ivy League schools. Why don't you go to these places, right? And their assumption was based on the fact that, I was in that school, my parents could do well. They didn't know necessarily that my dad was getting supported to pay for my high school at that time.
Mm.
So one of the things is like, you need to know the ability that you have to finance your own education and be smart about not getting in debt for it. I've heard a lot of people that are seeking for that name, right? Whether it's Stanford or Harvard or MIT, Brown, Yale, it doesn't matter what that name is, but they feel everybody that I admire seems to be connected in some way. And sometimes what we miss and don't realize is that there's space. There's space between you and where you are at the moment of high school and who you're going to become. And that learning doesn't need to happen necessarily with students from Harvard. That can be actually more damaging in terms of like really trying and setting, not because your hopes are high, your hopes should always be high, but that's not the only path to get you to where you want to go. So, for example, this is one of the misses I had. I wanted to study politics and political science. So I had that. So out of all the 13 schools that I applied to, 10 of them were in the area of DC, because I thought this is where I can get this education. And I just like focus so much. So in some ways, American University broke my heart because I really wanted to go there. I got a scholarship. But at the end of the day, back to back with the offering from Brandeis, it would have been silly for me to pick that, even though I thought their degree is going to be better because it's going to be more applicable. And I thought I knew what that was going to be like. At the end of the day, I'm doing technology and not political science for many other reasons. But one of the things is like, now that I look back, I'm like, ooh, I made a lucky decision in deciding to go with the more conservative financial burden for my parents and for myself, because I had a scholarship, but it was not a full scholarship. So I always advise, especially young women thinking about their career path, you can make up a lot in your first years of work, of your professional career. You can pivot your career, which is something that I love talking about, how you can be one thing and then be another thing another day. The important thing about college is the experience of community, the open-mindedness to learning, the way of thinking. College teaches you how to think, how to be curious, how to explore a problem. It's not going to teach you how to do the job that you're going to do. Like that's not what it's there for. So what is more important is being that type of community, and also remembering that, maybe a $60,000 debt, depending on where you come from, right?
Yeah.
So for some people, that is affordable and happy for them, and it's great. For a lot of us, it's not. That would have been prohibitive for my family and for myself. And I can say, I feel so good, and I still remember the day when I clicked send and I paid my college debt. And it's one of the biggest highlights in my career because it's something I did myself. Like I was able to be a junior professional and not have debt. And now, now I have the debt on my house, but that also has come from not kind of like acquiring debt and continue to have debt in my adult life, and being able to save and balance where you invest, how you think about your future. I think that that's one of the most important things we're looking for scholarships. It's like, don't sell yourself short. Don't care so much about the name of the school. Care about the culture, the environment of the school, about what you think you can learn, and if the environment is going to be set out for you to learn well, right? You need a small environment and an environment with a large nature campus. Are you a city person? Like all the things that are going to make you successful are more around where are you going to fit in to find really good networks, good friends. I genuinely believe that US institutions, for the most part in college, have great advisory career departments that even at my time back in the day, 20 something years ago, my best opportunities for internships came from my college. And Brandeis is not notorious for their technical school, but my first internship from the Higher Career Center was at lycos.com, for
Mm,
those out there who
yeah.
remember the days of early internet.
Yep.
And I still find that incredible, right? Because it's not that disconnected from what I do now, but back then I was like, oh, I wonder what I can do
Yeah.
there. It was more business oriented, but it has served shaped where I am now. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, because you were trailblazing into what we're in today, which is much more than the internet. We're doing so much with technology. It was the beginning of a big change for how we do business, how we live, how we communicate. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. So that's really good too. Good advice because I agree with you that it depends. You got to look at really what you're going to get out of that college. I mean, some colleges now do offer internships, but they also offer, especially in the technology or engineering, they have labs, some of them that get to work with a actual company. That's pretty cool. I mean, I guess in technology, I'm not sure how much some companies like Google probably even are involved with some of the universities on some projects with students. So you're right. Take a look at what it is that they're offering, how much you're going to, because those are pretty good experiences. Hands on is always nice.
Extremely. I love that you mentioned hands on experience because if I had to look back at my college career, one thing that my brother got by going to Northeastern was a whole year of what they called optional training, optional personal training, which is for anybody who's an immigrant and is coming not an American citizen. You have to go through the visa process, but you get a full year where you work actively in a company. And he got to work at John Hancock.
Hmm.
He got to he had another one, I believe it was Morgan Chase.
Hmm.
So he got this hands-on experience before he even graduated, right? And having been a hiring manager who hires for internships in the past, I can see and sense how competitive it has become to find an internship during summer. And on the flip side
Yeah.
of it, very rarely do you see an HR department or a talent organization that will say, oh, we'll give a student who's just a graduate a chance if they don't have a resume with actual training? It's very rare that they say, well, their education is enough for us to feel like we should hire them. Like they want to see that you work
Hmm.
somewhere. So I feel for the young men, women graduating now because the markets are competitive, and with technology a little bit of accelerated growth and learning has come along where you're expected to constantly be kind of at the forefront of innovation, be very aware of what the industry is doing,
Hmm.
so you have to put so much more work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, on the flip side, the pay is better, opportunities are better, companies are better, but there's always something that you're giving up to have those opportunities.
Yeah. Your brother had a really good opportunity there. I know, well, with my son, he's going to Kettering University, which is used to be called General Motors Institute, but they do the one quarter they work for a company, co-oping, and then the other quarter they're studying very in-depth condensed engineering. And I grew up in Flint, Michigan, where it's located, so I'm pretty proud that he's going there. And I'm seeing that it is quite expensive, and he's learned to apply for a lot of scholarships, and he's gotten really good break. But he knows he has to work and pay off some of those, and I'm very
Yeah.
proud that he's doing that. But I'm also very pleased that he's doing that because when I graduated, it was a catch 22. I didn't have the experience, and it was very hard. I was competing also with others. So I'm glad that that's now in place not only with this university, but I'm sure others, because you see them out there co-oping for summer for intern students. And I think it's nice that organizations see that. I think right now, with given the fact that there's so much a need for so many people to work for these companies, that they have to open the doors up and to these seniors graduating from high school and say, okay, we know you're going to college, and give them an internship. It's amazing, that that's going to happen with my son. He's coming right out of high school, and he's already been in these career fairs and interviews, and but these are skills that I think are really important. Yeah, I wish that the high schools would give these skills a little earlier, but it's always still good that these opportunities are evolving. That weren't there for, at least they weren't there when I was graduating from high school.
100%. I completely agree with you, and congratulations, because what an achievement. Like, I don't think when you're in it, you are in it with a whole graduating class. You are in it with other people, and you think, because the school structure, and especially through elementary school and high school, everybody's doing the same, right? Everybody's seeing the same. Everybody's going to the same classes. It's like very, very close knit group, and you all think you're going to end up in the same
Hmm.
place. It is truly in college and taking that leap that you start realizing how your paths start to
Yeah.
diverge, you know. And some of your graduating class will become founders and be like business leaders, which is going to be amazing to see. Some will go into corporate and like figure out what they're going to do, but many of them, it would take a long time to find the career path. And I say there's two types of people: the people that knew they were going to be doctors when they were 5, or lawyers, or like something very specific,
Hmm.
teachers,
Yeah.
that's another one, or serving the police. Like, they knew, it was always in their mind, they knew it. And then there's everybody else who's like, well, I could do this, I could do that, I could try this, I could try that. I'm certainly part of that second wave,
That's
where I knew I was smart. My parents really told me I could do something if I studied and I demonstrated that I was smart, that I could do anything that I wanted. And for me, it's been more about being ready for the opportunity. It's like, where do I want to be? What do I want to be doing? And should I try something new? Which I think has served me well. And that's another thing, because I think leaving high school, it's a very scary place for a lot of people who don't have in their mind, I'm going to medical school, I'm going to be a lawyer, or I'm going to be an engineer. They're more like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to be. I haven't yet found out. You have time.
hmm
But the important thing is that you do something with that time, that you take that next step, that you enroll. You're not sure, like, just speak in general, sciences, math, or not sciences, math. You want to do business, you pick. In general, I always talk about my sister, who she graduated as an art history major. She's very creative. She's a teacher now for small children who have learning disabilities.
Oh.
I mean, that leap, right? And she loves it. She's really good at it. And things evolve and change, and you'll get to know yourself. But she didn't hesitate. And it was hard for her to do college because she didn't like the structure, didn't like testing, didn't like grades. I think it is imposed in a lot of us. I've been really lucky that I feel I've been into like, fine, I'll do tests, I'll do grades. That comes easier to some people than others.
Mhm.
And we should recognize that. I think that society is changing to recognize the different modalities of learning. And I'm very passionate about education because I think we haven't given everybody the same equitable chance to be amazing.
Mhm.
And it's because our system is so structured.
Mhm.
But even if you don't fit into that what you think is that college mode, it's very likely that there's a community and a path for you that is gonna like actually lean you into that thing that you're gonna be. And I think it's like keeping that in mind is important. Not everybody has it figured out. I certainly did not have this figured out at 18 or at 22.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have figured out now, but I'm on my way.
Well, let's talk about that now. You have business and technology. Tell us about what is it like? The roles that you've had. What have they been like? What have your responsibilities been? Because it sounds like you're in a lot of the design, the product design. You're in those areas. So it'd be great to
Yeah.
know how has the degree and how has everything evolved, and what have you done in your journey as far as your career goes?
Yeah, great. That's a really good question. And like, I'll out myself by saying I've been working for 20 years. I celebrated that this year, and it feels like I cannot believe it's been 2 decades, which seems like a lot. But I've only worked at 3 companies. And that's partially my age. The workforce didn't move that fast when I started working. But that's also partially that I had a really good opportunity as soon as I graduated college. So I graduated college, and I really wanted to move to New York and pursue my business. I had a political science double major because I still was passionate about it, but I had already decided that I was not going to use it. I knew that my economics degree I could put into action with my international business major and concentration in French. I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to move to New York. I'm going to work in banking and finance, and it's going to be wonderful. For different reasons, that didn't happen. And I started feeling like the time was collapsing on me, the time to get a work visa, because I couldn't stay in the country without it. So I had to kind of pivot my strategy and start thinking about, in a world at the time, because this was right at the cusp of 2001, when there was a lot of pressure in the country for what it was to accept immigrants in your workforce, getting people from other places. I decided very quickly, I will get whatever job I can, as long as I'm able to have that experience of work in the US. So that was my goal. So when I started applying for jobs, although I wanted to go to New York, and that dream fell apart very quickly, so I decided to pivot. And I looked everywhere in Boston. I did interviews in a library. I did interviews for computing companies. I did interviews for economic analysis companies. I did interviews in the suburbs. I did interviews in big buildings in downtown Boston. I did interviews door-to-door sales. I spent a whole day walking door to door and selling some product. I don't even remember what it was. And at the end of these journeys, for the most part, I was told, you're great, wonderful. It would be wonderful to have you, but we cannot get you a visa. Because what the visa requires is a lot of paperwork by the company saying how you're needed and you're stellar and you're different from the other candidates. And it's also costly. So I had like looked tangentially to anything that was related to business, like sales, like marketing, like economic analysis, and didn't have any luck. Finally, I saw this post for a sales job in this publisher. And I'm like, well, it was a foreign language publisher. They were like trying to create books for learning Spanish. And I was like, well, I speak Spanish. Let me go and see what this is about. So I actually made it to the last round of that interview and I didn't get it. But the founder of that company, who was Colombian American, told me, would you be willing to do a few other interviews and explore a career as an editor? And I was like, what? Not really thinking about it too much. I remember like doing the test, even asking my dad, can you help me? Like, am I writing well in Spanish? Because I've been studying English the last 8 years in school. And, like I went and he's like, yep, I'm going to come in, train you as an editor. We're building all these programs in Spanish, French. I have growth path. Come join us. And my dad is like, is that a legitimate company? Because it was a startup. And I was employee number 12, something like that. So because he was Colombian American and had that immigrant experience, he was like, I know how to get the visa. We have other Colombians working with us. So he did my visa paperwork. And I worked at Visa Higher Learning for 15 years. 15 plus years.
Wow, that's great.
And the experience there was, I trained as an editor, which helped me do so many cool things. Like, one, write really well in Spanish and English, because we were doing education. So everything that you touch has to be like kind of perfect. And so you have that diligence. I didn't think this was going to be valuable when I was doing it, but I realize now in my 40s how valuable it is actually to have those skill sets. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, it was fun. Like, I had to call France and talk to permission owners of famous French photographers or French artists that had literature that we wanted to include in our books. I was able to travel in Latin America and shoot video for the videos of the language learning. Wow. So one of the experiences of being in a small company is that you get to do so many things. I was able to travel all over the US and give presentation on our products. I was able to work in marketing campaigns. There's such a variety of skills that I learned in the job, plus budgeting, P&L, and like all these things that I never thought I was going to do, that I'm really, really grateful for.
Yeah, in a small business, you wear a lot of hats. So it's
And
not like
sometimes
in
that's
corporate where there are a
undervalued,
lot
right?
of departments and everybody does something. So those were really good, you got to learn what an entrepreneur like, especially, because of the size of it, you had to be in a lot of different roles. They needed you in
Yeah.
those areas.
I love talking about the opportunity of working for a small company because I think we blow out of proportion working in a large company. Because, much like a fancy school with a fancy name, in some ways now in my industry in technology, everybody wants to work at Google, everybody wants to work at Meta, everybody wants to work at Netflix. Nothing against any of those places, but there are jobs everywhere where you're going to learn really valuable skills
Hmm.
and you're going to be allowed to do things.
Yeah.
So within 2 years, I pivoted from being an editor to working with technology. That meant working with one engineer in my company. And within 2 years, I was being, I would say shipped, but flown to San Francisco to work with experts in technology at the time, a contract engineering team and design team to develop the first language learning program fully online for the company.
Wow, that is great.
And I didn't know it at the time, but I went, delivered requirements, talked through designs, came back, and a few months later, we had a product, right? It was a very waterfall method. Now we work more in agile.
Hmm.
But the formation of being able to do that by myself in my early 20s, it was incredible. And I saw that product go to market, fail when it went to market, work with marketing to pivot that product and create a new marketing strategy. So I had like this wonderful experience. And to me, that's still one of the biggest highlights in my career because the iteration of that product that at the time was called Enlinea
Hmm.
has kind of like converted, changed names. Now it's called Portales, but it continues to be
Mm,
the best selling online language learning language program for Spanish in all of the US.
that is great.
And I think like that is such a wonderful opportunity. At the time it wasn't, right? So seeing something that didn't exist that you made that gets used and you learn from that usage from your users, you get the opportunity to go to campuses and sell it, was wonderful. So to me, that was the formation that actually led me to Wayfair, where I worked in e-commerce. And it was a very different job in a large company. A lot of people know Wayfair.com now from all the wonderful commercials and furniture. And that was a shift from being a very small place where everybody knew me and I wore a lot of hats and managed a big team and a lot of budgets, coming to this place where you're like tiny fish in this giant ocean of people. It was very different, but also enriching and wonderful. I believe that it was during that time that I got kind of reconnected with my Latin roots because I had taken it for granted. But at Vista, I was working in language learning programs. So I was always exposed to a lot of diverse cultures.
Mm,
We did products in Spanish, French, Italian, German. So there was always diversity in the office and outside the office because you have to travel and work with language teachers. So you're always talking about just like being from a different place, which is how I grew up and I was very used to. Going to Wayfair, yes, the teams were diverse. There were a lot of engineers from Asia, a lot of engineers from India. But when you look at that massive space, they were trying to get more DEI into the smaller teams, right? I was one of two product leaders in a department of 300.
mm.
There were no other women there. And like, you start thinking about what that means, how to navigate that, and how to connect with other women leaders, which in part is how you and I ended up
Well,
meeting.
were you the only Latina too in these roles, especially at Wayfair?
So in my department, I was the only Latina. I was very fortunate to meet other Latina leaders at Wayfair in other different departments and very grateful of participating in their ERG, which is their employee resource group
Hmm.
for Latinos
Right.
there. The first year, I just was a participant and a member, and that's how I got to connect with a lot of really amazing Latino people and professionals that were working there. But the second year, I got to actually lead the group with a few of them, and it was an amazing experience. So even though I wouldn't say it was like equitable, and there were many of us, one of the things that I think a large company can offer to pitch the positive benefits of that is that you find a way to find your
Oh,
community,
yeah.
right? Because there's so many of you. They're there, they're hitting you. You look for
The
them.
yeah,
So
ERG, when it got created, it opened a door for us to have our community within the company, which is good. Uh, Definitely is a value. So you left Wayfair, and now where are you?
So I left Wayfair in January, and now this is my return to education. I think I missed it.
You did a full
So I'm at
circle.
this company, full circle, this company called Ellvevation. And what I love about Ellvevation is really they're very mission driven. So our main goal right now is really to bring every English learner an emergent bilingual to meet their highest aspirations. So when a young student who doesn't have English as a first language joins a school, the products that I build right now support that district or that school to run the programs that help level out that
Mm,
student.
that's
Um,
great. And these are
and
online programs that you're working on. So there's where the technology comes in that you're looking
yeah,
at, what
so
is it, the algorithms, the way that the back end data is working and how it's going to benefit the
yeah, that's
schools.
a really good question. So at Vista, I worked on programs that were for learning for teaching the student. At Wayfair, I worked on the back end, on the catalog side, very back end. And in my new role, I've been able to mix both, right? So Ellvevation has three major products.
Wow.
One product is for the students, which is a math product. A second product is for the teachers, which is a professional development product. My product is actually what we call the platform,
Mm,
which is basically all the functioning tools that help you run the program, that keep all the forms, documentation, data that you need to know about that student progress. So if a child joins a school, say in grade 3, and they're identified as an emergent bilingual, the school will put them in a program and will enable certain supports for that student so that they can get an interpreter, they can get accommodations when they're testing, et cetera, et cetera. So the product that I build basically helps support kind of the student file, the student history, and how they progress from being identified as an emergent bilingual all the way through what we call exit or graduation,
mm.
which is like this is where they're meeting the standards for English so that we can know that they have leveled out with the remainder of their class. Right? So that's what we call success, having this wonderful bilingual kids in the U.S.
That is really
districts.
great. I like that. And it's amazing that you started in something that was teaching, it was in language, and now you're back to it. And of course, it's a little different. You're teaching English as a second language, but you're helping a lot of immigrant children to get even better at their English. And so these are for
And also to bring the diversity, which is another thing that I think is super important, right? Which is also the flip of the script.
Mhm.
I would say that when these laws got enacted, it's something about the history that I love. The whole point was you as an immigrant need to learn English, need to learn to speak it well, to write it well, to do all these things well. Still, that is the requirement, but there's an element in all the strategies and structure that we build into our systems that also call for understanding across cultures, bringing your true self, like we do to work, but bringing your whole self to school, right? So understanding that just because you don't speak English, then you're equal. Because the reality is, we, for example, in our platform, create translations of over 170 languages for parents of that diverse background. So, a child who comes from a Mexican background and has arrived in Texas, for example, is very different from a child who's coming from China and arrived to New York. And, very different from a child that maybe came from Europe or Northern Africa and is arriving to Minnesota.
Yeah.
The dynamics in that program have to be very different, and the way that you take in that child and help them explore how to help them get through the curriculum and the standards of the state or the district, kind of like there's a mechanism there and strategies that will be different. And understanding kind of that richness is something really important. as opposed to just understanding, hey, English is the only thing you're learning. Like, what we want you is to understand what's happening in the class so you can actually share the richness of your culture, of your language, of your background. So there's a more give and take than I feel there's been ever, right? And I think that's why the work is so important.
Yeah, it sounds great. So you had quite a great journey. And so if you were to look back when you were in high school, after going through so much of what had a really rich background and you have really great experiences, but is there something that you would advise yourself, given the fact that you've already gone through the journey, that you would wish that you had someone tell you, or some advice or something from lessons learned that you would tell yourself as a high school student?
So it's interesting because I always say there's three things I would change about the way, if I had to do my life again, I don't have any regrets. I'm super happy where I ended
Hmm.
up. But if I could do it all over again, knowing what I know today, one, I love my job in product and building technology. So I would definitely study engineering. I love that I study what I studied. I think it has given me a lot of advantages, but I would definitely go back
Hmm.
and try to learn the other side. I think that there's a world there that is growing and speeding up so rapidly that new generations inevitably are going to be touched by that. I remember when I started looking for a job and it was like jobs in technology. Like every job is in technology right now. You're even the act of creating a podcast was not possible 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So everything that we do is in technology. So I would not miss the chance to get in much earlier than I did. So that's one thing. And the other thing, which is tangential to high school and college, um, if given the opportunity again, I had an opportunity to go to France and do an exchange program, and I didn't. For silly reasons of a young person, like, oh, my friends are here. I would, and I think like I moved a lot, so I just felt like I moved when I was growing up. Like, why would I leave my
Mm.
friends? Bad idea. No, don't do it. Go, take the chance. As you grow older, your life gets settled. You get in debt because you want to buy a house. You get responsibilities with your family. Maybe you partner up. Maybe you have kids. I have two dogs. There's a lot of reasons why life kind of starts settling in one place.
Mhm.
So that would be my other advice. Some kids take that leap year where they are able to do something for their community, to volunteer, to experience the world in different ways before picking college. That's a great idea. If you're unsure, if you don't know, if the circumstance is not clear for you, I always say usually the right things in life happen when you're curious and aware of the opportunities and happen easily.
Mm.
So that would be what I would redo. Go abroad and study engineering.
Wow, that's great. That definitely covers everything. That's wonderful. And if you do, you have I know in our culture we have a lot of dichos or sayings. Is there one that resonates with you as you were growing up that maybe your parents, or one that you hold as far as a lesson to kind of guide you through your day?
Yeah. I love this question. I'm laughing because when you send me that idea of like, do I have a quote? I thought you meant like a quote about my professional career and technology.
No.
So I picked one, but that's not what you meant. I will say there's a philosophy which I've come to realize is more and more true over time. And I've learned to embrace it, which is you don't want to listen to your parents, but the day will come when you realize you're becoming like them. Embrace that. And I think I've always been very independent. This is the reason why I applied to go miles away from my family to come to school.
Mm.
And again, I'm not a person of regrets. I love my life. I think I made really good decisions. But man, do I miss my mom.
Mm.
I miss my mom. I miss my dad. I miss being close to family. It's a choice that I feel like I make every day to be away from them, especially as an older person. And here and there now, I see how the things that they taught me from a very young age are becoming true. That your values are more important than how much you make, that feeling being determined is going to get you more places
Mm.
than how many books you've read, that having good relationships and true friendships, it's really what you are going to end up valuing long term, as opposed to a title or a particular job in a particular company. And more I see myself telling others that and being like, oh my god, I'm speaking like my mother. And it's a little scary, but I'm learning to embrace it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you're so that's wonderful. So, well, thank you, Paola. I really appreciate all that you shared with us and our listeners, and basically, it's great to just to know all this that you've gone through, because there's a lot of others that are going through maybe that journey similar, and a lot to take in from what you've told us. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. For anybody listening, if you want to know more, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy and I'm always very proud. I don't have children, but I think of the new generation of young Latinas, Latinos working and striving to get to that ambition that our parents have aspired us
Mhm.
to fulfill. And I will always be happy to support anybody with a mock interview, a resume review, talking about what it has been to jump into a technology pathway without having a technical degree, for example,
That's
but also how to choose and how to make decisions if you have multiple job offers, how to negotiate your salary, all these things that you learn just by doing them over time, right? So if anybody wants to connect, I'm always happy, no matter how young you are. I hope that you have very successful futures. And thank you so much for having me.
well, that's great. As we're evolving here, we will start having a mentoring program. So we will definitely have you on the list to connect with those Latinas that want to, learn more and have a guide like you. So thank you for offering that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, this concludes Ask a Latina. Thank you for being with us, and I hope you will join us in the next one.